Hey everyone, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, episode 52. Welcome to another episode of the Writer's Mind Podcast. Today we are back in the Fooled By Randomness book by Nassim Taleb. If you didn't listen to episode 51, I talked about this book, and this book is about probabilities. This book is about randomness. This book is about people's lapses in thinking. Honestly, it is a fascinating book. I'm still not totally done with it. I'm probably about halfway through at the time of recording this, but I wanted to go back through and share some of the things that I found in it that I thought were really interesting, and maybe allow you to go back and read it yourself, or just to send you on some interesting thought trails in your own head. So one of the things that he talks about is essentially that we exist in a world that is not deterministic, that things are random or unexplainable to us, and that when we look in the past, it's easy for us to see the only things that happened in the past, right? We're not thinking about what could have happened. We're only looking at what actually happened in the past. Then what happens is we're looking towards the future, and there's all sorts of things that could happen, right? And so now we enter this weird world of probability where we're trying to figure out, okay, what is going to happen in the future? How can I predict what's going to happen in the future? And then we end up in this weird place. So I think one of the interesting things that he talks about that really made me think was that, the past always seems deterministic, and that it's easy to look behind and believe that, things had to happen this particular way, or it was obvious that things had to transpire how they did. But then suddenly we're here and it doesn't look like that, doesn't seem like that, which what we don't realize is that in the past, they were dealing with the past, of course, like it was the present. And that meant that the future was uncertain, and there were all sorts of different things that could happen. And so the people who lived through major events in the past were making decisions as they went along, just like we are doing, right? One of the things that he notes in this book was, he asks, did the people in the 1929 stock market crash know they were going through a huge point in history? Probably not, right? They, we believe, I think, so one of the things he says is that life for us is made to resemble an adventure movie, as we know ahead of time that something big is about to happen. It's hard to imagine that people who witnessed history did not know at the time how important the moment was. But then what happens is because we learn about the past a certain way, we learn about how people made decisions, and the other thing is that historians give reasons for why certain things happen. Then it makes it very difficult for us to look at the present and think about what may happen in the future, because we don't think about the past in the sense of probabilities, and then it makes it hard to think about the future in a probabilistic sense. So what do I mean by this? Let me try to explain. So one of the things that he says that I thought was really, really interesting was that you want to try to build a scenario where you are, let's say you achieve your goals, or you become successful, whatever. He's specifically talking about trading, in different trading markets. But finding the most certain way that you can go forward. And essentially what this means is that you become successful in the most amount of parallel universes. So with all the things that could happen, how do you get what you want and move in the direction that you want to do in the highest amount of those potential universes? And one of the things that he uses as an example to illustrate this idea is that a lottery winner, if you win the lottery, right, you have the one in like, a crazy, hundreds of millions, 1 in a billion chance of winning the lottery, right? You win the lottery in this reality, and that's fantastic. You win. However, in every other potential reality, you don't win the lottery. And so you might win, but that doesn't mean that decision to buy the ticket was the right decision, and it doesn't mean that there are any innate qualities within you that makes it so that in other parallel universes you would also be successful or be rich or be the person that you want to be. And I think that one of the things that he talks about that I think is really interesting is when we are trying to figure out what to do, we have to use the information that we are given in the present, of course. And then he says that we look at mistakes in the sense of looking behind and saying, oh, I should have known this, or this was a mistake, when in reality, sometimes we are making the best decision with the information we have at a given time. And that isn't necessarily a mistake. So a mistake is not just the objective wrong decision. A mistake is making the wrong decision with the information that you have. And I think that was an interesting way that he phrased this, and saying that it isn't a mistake if it's the best decision with the information that you have at the particular time. And so I think what he really is alluding to here is building up character qualities that allow you to go in the direction that you want to go into, whether that's success or another way. I think I mentioned in the last podcast about the Iliad and the heroes in the Iliad, and he mentions that it's very interesting that they are not judged for winning or losing, but by what they do with the information that they have, and that we need to try and do the same thing. And so how do we actually do this, right? It's like, well, what you actually have to think about is the fact that you don't want to be lucky as much as possible, right? Like, success through luck is more detrimental to you. And the reason for it, really, I was thinking about this, is that, like, as we are trying to be successful, as we are trying to achieve things, as we are trying to exist in the world in a certain way, really what we're trying to do ultimately is build ourselves to the highest possible version of ourselves that we could be, right? And that ultimately what we are trying to do is not necessarily just win money or sell a screenplay or whatever, but we essentially become the, as cliche as it sounds, the highest version of our own potential that we can be. And that really doesn't actually have anything to do with the specific amount of money you made or how many screenplays you sold or some of these more, external metrics. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is become the intelligent, wise, powerful, gentle, thinking person in that essentially allows you to make the right decisions no matter the information that you have in front of you, or you make the correct decisions, and then the randomness of the world has less of an impact on who you are, right? And that you have to find a way to make peace with the decisions that you make now if those decisions are right with the information that you have. And I think that just like when I talked about the book Way of the Superior Man, which I still think is fantastic, and I'm going to go back and reread that probably pretty soon. I think there's a similar idea there where that book is talking about the present moment and becoming the highest version of yourself in that present moment, becoming, like understanding that what your life is now is always what your life will be, and there never is a real difference. You're always just existing within the world and handling problems and being. And I think it's interesting that in a way Nassim in this book is looking at a similar kind of idea where he's saying that even to be successful and to be a person of honor, it is really what you do and how you conduct yourself, not necessarily your external win or loss every single time, because you can win or lose because of forces that are essentially out of your control. And I thought that was it's interesting that he's looking at this from a market standpoint and from a, trading stocks and futures and bonds and that sort of standpoint, because it's something that I'm interested in. And also, I'm always interested in the parallels between different disciplines, right? Like, one of the things I've thought about more and more, especially as I've been interested in storytelling, as well as business, as well as financial markets and these sorts of things, and cryptocurrency markets and this sort of thing, that I am interested in the core tenets that seem to transfer from discipline to discipline, right? So one of the things that definitely seems to transfer is about trying to making the correct decision in the present, living within the present, and having an understanding that ultimately who you are is based upon the actions that you make in the present with the information that you have, and understanding that mistakes can be categorized in different ways, and that just because something doesn't go your way doesn't necessarily mean you made a mistake. I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Now, of course, we make mistakes all the time. That's not discounting the idea that I'm not saying that we don't make mistakes, but that we have to understand, okay, what was us knowing that we should have done something differently and not doing that, and that is making a mistake, versus going off the information that we have at a given point, and then that just simply not working out for potentially reasons outside of our own control. What's interesting as well is he talks about the news, and he talks about how much the information around us is meaningless clutter, right? And this is something that's kind of interesting because it also relates to a lot of screenwriting, where in screenwriting, most of what you write is meaningless clutter, and rather than adding ideas into your story, a lot of times it's about taking out all the ideas until you have the most simple version of the story, and that really is the core of your story, and you can build clearly around that, the core elements of your story, versus trying to add a new idea to fix something every single time. The same way as he was looking at the news, and he's looking at even in history and talking about how there's a level of noise in the consistent daily news that we get that doesn't actually really have too much to do with reality. And he's talking about the acting upon just general news that isn't necessarily meaningful can be super detrimental to both the actions that you make and also the thoughts that you have and your general outlook. And I thought that was interesting as well, because he's talking about that. Let's see. So one of the things he talks about is, for an idea, age is beauty. It is premature to discuss. No. He's saying to value distilled thought, so age is beauty, value distilled thought over newer thinking, regardless of its apparent sophistication. So one of the things he talks about is, reading books rather than watching or listening to the news is more valuable to you. And I think it's interesting looking at something like that in regards to financial markets, where it seems that news is constantly what is driving things. But then he's talking about looking at probabilities, looking at people's understanding of of market cycles and these sorts of things allows you to actually make better decisions. And I think this also really applies to writing and particularly to screenwriting, because what I see a lot of writers struggle with is that they are constantly worried about what is Netflix buying right now and what was the new major genre on streaming platforms to go big, and how do we create more content catered towards that genre. And while that might work in the short term, it doesn't actually work if you're trying to make impactful stories that last a long time. And so just as somebody trying to look at financial markets should go to historical analysis of previous market cycles, older, more wise traders, people's books written on the movements of markets and these sorts of things rather than the news, you should do the same thing in the sense of going back to old films, old stories, and gleaning why they work at their core, rather than looking at what came out this year and how do I make a story just like the one that came out 6 months ago, because that audience is clearly hot and people are buying or watching this particular story. And so I think that what we seem to live in is a time where information is moving so fast constantly. And this is something that I have really, really struggled with, especially with Twitter and these sorts of things, where information is just coming at you constantly. And it's so easy to be constantly adjusting your trajectory against the news and information that seems to be coming at you, when in reality, I have found that the most important, most valuable things that I've learned are through books and through actual distilled information that is much more signal rather than noise. I think the issue with journalism and the issue with things like Twitter and undistilled information is that it's so much noise, it's so much think, go, that it's missing the refinement that is necessary to really share core ideas and core concepts. That's why I'm really, really enjoying this book, because he is trying to cut through a lot of noise, and especially in fields that are so random and complex, is really kind of finding, okay, what are the patterns? What can we know? What can math teach us? What can history teach us about how the world moves and about probabilities? And that's a big thing, too, that I've never really thought about, that he is really thinking about trying to maximize your own certainty, in the sense of doing things and playing games that allow you the highest advantage because of your learned skill set to succeed in that thing, right? A great example of this would be, it is better to operate a business than it is to gamble money in a casino, because while you might be able to hit it huge in a casino and win $5 million in a night, you cannot replicate that easily. Whereas it's easier to replicate a business that has consistent profits than it is, playing the lottery or playing in a casino. And so that is frustrating sometimes, because I think now especially, I feel like not only with markets, but also in writing, where it's like watching people's methods and watching what people do in writer's success, you want to adjust your plan or adjust what you're doing to fit exactly what this writer did. Oh, this writer made a short film that won Sundance and then they sold their feature that way. I need to make a short. Oh, this writer was an assistant at Sony and then so I need to do this. Or this writer wrote this genre film and I need to do that. And I think ultimately what we need to do is remember why stories matter, what the purpose of them are, and then write according to that. Write according to actually teaching people things of value or presenting an idea that is of value, or looking at something that happened in your own life, examining it, having real critical thought about it, and then bringing that to an audience in a distilled way where they can actually look at an idea and say, oh, that is fascinating, or that helps me see the world better, or that brings me a level of comfort I didn't have before, or exposes me to an idea that I hadn't thought about before. So hopefully that's valuable to you. If I learn anything else interesting in this book, I'll definitely let you know. I'm sure I will. But other than that, I will see you guys next week.